Hey, welcome to unit number two. I'm glad you stayed with us. And we're going to talk today about absolutism in three specific places. We're going to talk about it in France, Spain, and England. I'm going to let your textbook talk to you about it in Russia. And so we're just going to move on here. So here we go. Age of absolutism, France, Spain, and England. When we're looking at these three kingdoms, each one is going to be slightly different. Basically, following the Renaissance in roughly 1500, you start to see a decline in the power of the Catholic Church. And because of this decline in the decline in the power of the Catholic Church, and so then you're going to see this rise in the power of local kings and queens. It starts off at first at the lower noble level, and then expands on to kings and queens. And so a lot of times, especially in larger kingdoms like England, France, and Spain, everybody's going to answer to either whoever's in charge. And so this idea leads to people start to wonder why we're answering to these people. Why are these people in charge? And so this gives us the birth of this idea of divine right, in which God chose that king to rule, right? And that traces back to your first kings. Like, hey, either the first kings were considered gods or godlike, and so like, hey, if God chose James to be our king, well, then we need to pay attention to James. And as kings, as the king and monarch's powers grow, we start to see this birth of something called absolutism, in which the monarchs have total control over the power of the lives of the people. And it's a change from this feudal system that existed early on before, in which you had kings on the top, and then nobles, and then knights, and then everybody else, the serfs or the peasants on the bottom. This is a change because the kings are going to really start to take away the power from those mid-level nobles, and we'll look at different ways that they do that, or they're just trying to control larger areas of kingdoms. And so this idea of divine right is very important. Absolutism, this period of absolutism is where kings were in total charge. And again, this is a change because before that, like, nobles were all kind of seen as equals, but kings were a little bit better. They're like the first in the line among equals. And so I think the textbook says something like they're they were the first in the first in well, they were first among equals. It's basically the idea that I just said twice now, right? And so in absolutism, it's different. Number one, the king is the absolute holder of power. They hold all the power in the kingdom. And then number two, every action that the king or queen does is going to either preserve or diminish the rights of their subjects. And so that's going to be a change away from that idea of equals. And monarchs are going to claim, again, divine right. Their authority is going to come from God. It's going to put them above the law. They can do no wrong because, after all, God is the one that told them to be there. And so some of the common factors that we're going to see during this period of absolutism is strong armies, because if you guys haven't realized it, people don't always want to do what God says, right? Especially when God's telling you to do something that's through somebody else, even if that's not the case. But theoretically, God chooses James to be our king. Well, we're not going to always want to do what James tells us to do. So there you go, right? It's similar to this idea of a mandate of heaven, or that the monarchs are above the law. So you have strong armies, and if the king has all the power, then you really don't need representative lawmaking bodies like parliament or whoever. And so you see less and less of that. And to pay for those armies, and to pay for the military action that's going to follow having a large army under an absolute king, you're going to see high levels of taxation. So the common people, the nobles, are going to be paying high levels of taxes, and that's going to be pretty common. Okay, I already kind of covered that, right? We're going to see a breakdown of feudalism, like we talked about, where if you think of power as a pizza, there's only so many slices of power that can be handed out. And if the king is going to take extra pieces of pizza, if not all of the pizzas, all the pieces, then there's not going to be enough left over for other nobles. We're also going to see periods of continuous warfare because, after all, if I'm given all the power under heaven by God, I'm going to try to expand my areas of influence. You're going to constantly need money because war is expensive. And you're going to see that declining influence in the church. And this is also going to correspond with this period of global exploration, started by the Spanish, well, it's actually started by the King of Portugal, but when Columbus finds the New World and those things that we just talked about in the previous unit. All right. Some of the effects of absolutism. If God chose the king to rule, then the God knows what religion, how he wants to be worshipped. And so the king's religion is basically going to become everybody's religion. And so that becomes very, very prevalent. You're going to see a loss of power by the nobles and the legislature. If you're not going to have a representative body of lawmakers, then you're not going to have common people with power. But you are going to see a birth in bureaucrats. These are going to be agents of the government. These aren't elected officials. These aren't people that really have power that comes from the people. They're people that they're individuals whose power comes from the king. Think of them as like tax collectors or appraisers, tax appraisers, those things. And you're also going to see a bunch of building projects during this time frame because kings are going to they're going to tax everybody. They're going to have huge amounts of money coming in to support their armies, but they're also going to want to glorify themselves. And so we're going to see that as an example in France when Louis XIII begins the construction of the Palace of Versailles. Okay, absolutism. Again, we're dealing with all the power resting in the hands of the king, and we talked about the War of the Three Henrys and all that. And there's multiple when we talked about the War of the Three Henrys with France, and you have Protestant King Henry or Protestant Prince Henry and the King Henry of France, and then you have the leader of the Catholic League, and they're all able to form armies to battle each other for control of France. You're not going to see that during absolutism because the king is going to hold all of that power. And so other nobles aren't going to be able to raise armies or have funds to do those types of things. And you're going to see that consolation of that construction of power around the king or the queen, right? And all that power is going to sit on the throne. And that's what we're looking at. So speaking of the War of Three Henrys, here's our Huguenot Henry, right? Huguenot Henry is going to actually win the War of the Three Henrys in 1598. He becomes Henry the Fourth of France, and he passes this Edict of Nantes, which is going to allow religious freedom for Protestants, and he rules for a short period of time, 12 years. Is going to oversee some periods of religious tolerance and relatively nice treatment of the French Protestants. And then when he dies, his son, Louis XIII, takes over. And Louis XIII is 13 years old when he takes the throne. And he is not, and no 13-year-olds ready to lead all of France, even if they think they are. And so he's given an advisor. And I always butcher this guy's name, but I always call him Cardinal Richelieu. And basically Richelieu runs the country. And so he's the one that's going to bring France into that 30 Years' War on the side of the Protestants. And he's going to increase the power of Louis XIII. And he's going to increase the power of France in all of Europe, right? You remember the 30 Years' War. France goes to war with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire to prevent France from being controlled on both sides, because the Habsburg family is going to control not only Spain, but they're also going to control the Holy Roman Empire. And so France would be surrounded on both sides, and that's not a good position to be in. Okay, Richelieu is also going to take away the power of the nobles. And he's going to give that to the king. And so as France grows in power on the European stage, so does the power of the king of France, right? And so if he takes away the ability of nobles to, tax their lands or whatever, hold on to tax money, he's also going to take away their ability to form alliances with other nations. And so nobles are going to keep their social rights, but they're going to lose a lot of their economic rights to tax their land and to raise armies and those types of things that were traditionally seen during the period of feudalism. And so all of that power is going to be that power doesn't go away, right? Power is pizza. Those slices of pizza are just going to be taken off of the nobles' plates and brought over to the king. And so that's going to increase his share of the pizza. And that's how I think about it, right? France gets involved in that 30 Years' War, and they expand their influence, and they come out of that war as a major European player. Louis the 13th dies, and Louis the 13th dies, and his 4-year-old son, Louis the 14th, comes to power, and again he is he's given an advisor. And so Richelieu, by that point, had gone away because he was probably dead, to be honest. But Cardinal Marzin, his Louis the 14th's advisor, basically he ends the 30 Years' War, takes France out of it, signs the peace deal, and Louis the 14th is going to A, be 4 years old on the throne, and B, he's going to be one of the most powerful monarchs in all of Europe. Okay. But when he's 22, Louis the 14th takes power. And if you really want a true picture of absolutism, Louis the 14th is probably it. Louis the 14th wants to control all aspects of the French life. He is a very powerful king, very charismatic. He further weakens the powers of the nobles. One of the things that he does is he's going to build this huge palace in Versailles, one of the major building projects, right, of the French. He's going to turn a small royal hunting a small hunting cabin outside of Paris. He's going to turn that into a large, probably one of the most beautiful palaces ever built. And then he's going to require the nobles to live there with him during the legislative year. So 9 months out of the year, the nobles are going to have to live outside of Paris with Louis. And so that's going to take their power away because they're going to be away from their kingdoms and from the areas that they control. Louis is going to put government bureaucrats in their place to rule those kingdoms. And then he's going to cause those nobles to compete for his affection, right? He'll have like contests to see who gets to dress him in the morning. So it's like a huge honor if you get to dress the king or undress the king. He does lots of those things. Other thing he does is he realizes in the New World, in New France, and modern day Canada, there's French men that don't have French women to marry, right? And so he wants to try to populate the New World to try to compete with England and England and Spain in this development of the New World. And so he creates this new program called La Fille de Riche, which I just destroyed the pronunciation of that, but basically means daughters of the king. And so he takes all the unmarried women in the large cities of France, and he compiles basically kind of like a modern day like Match.com or like Tinder or whatever online dating sites are out there, and he compiles like little profiles of these girls, and then he sends that book off to the New World, and then he rounds up these girls, he sends them, and it's a program, they volunteer to go. He takes these girls that volunteer to go, sends them across the ocean to New France, and places like Montreal or Quebec, and they have these huge like mixers, I guess, where the tradesmen, the French, come in and they meet the women, and they're supposed, hopefully they meet and they fall in love, and they have little French babies, and then little French babies meet other French babies, and they fall in love, and they have more babies, and they populate this area of New France. Overall, the project is mildly successful. The population of New France does increase, but not the way that he wants to. But you can see the power that Louis the 14th is going to have, in the fact that he's going to be able to relocate single women out of France into the New World, right? Louis the 14th is going to call himself the Sun King, and honestly, if you come to power when you're 4 years old, everybody's going to tell you that you can't do wrong, right? You can see here he's riding a horse, and he has somebody behind him that holds the umbrella, but to keep the sun off of him so he doesn't get sunburnt. He spends most of his day, he'll get up and go hunt, come back, have lunch, do a couple hours worth of king work, I suppose, in Versailles, go hunt again. He has numerous mistresses. Most of these mistresses are going to be wives of the people in his court. So like he's gonna have relations with his subjects, with his wives. He's gonna, so again, no, the overall idea though is no one's gonna tell him no, and so he builds Versailles, and he makes the nobles live there, and he controls every aspect of their life, what they're gonna eat, where they're gonna sleep, who they're gonna see during the day, are they gonna dress him, or are they not gonna dress him, right? And Versailles is going to be one of the most splendidly constructed palaces ever made. It's going to cost so much money that today it would cost roughly $2.5 billion in today's money. But it's supposed to be a centerpiece of the power of the French king, right? It's going to show off all the splendor that belongs to the king. Everything in that picture there that you see that looks like gold is gold. At least it's gold plated, right? It's one of the most, I've never been to Versailles, but it's supposed to be one of the most wonderful places that exist, right? They're gonna have a ballet. They'll have like a big performance theater. They have ballet troops brought in. They have operas. All of the artwork is commissioned. It's one of my history professors when I was doing my undergrad said that all of the statues in the garden would have one of the faces of Louis's mistresses. So he was sleeping with, throughout his life he had numerous women that he would sleep with. Basically, he would sleep with everybody, but then like at the same time he has certain mistresses that were in his favor. And so like if you were in his favor, he would have a statue commissioned with your face on a statue out there, right? So like it's just a picture of splendid noble power. You can see over here in our picture over here on the left, Louis are probably receiving a noble from another court in Europe, and everybody's lined up to support Louis, and this gentleman has to walk up these stairs and bow before him, right? So it just shows the absolute power. And here's some pictures. You can see some of the walkway, or just the splendor, the size of Versailles. This is what you would pull up to in the front. Following the French Revolution, which we'll talk about, Versailles becomes a museum for the French people. Here's one of the gardens and the walkways. These fountains, this fountain that you see here, there's fountains all over Versailles. And they were set to, there wasn't enough water or water pressure to run the fountains all the time. So when the king would walk through the gardens, they would have gardeners that would sit there, and they would turn the fountains on for the king as he walked by, and then as his party left, they would shut them down. And so while Versailles looks wonderful on the outside, it's really, I mean, today it's fantastic, I'm sure, but back then it had major problems. You have all these people living in this wonderful castle, and there's no indoor plumbing, and so the nobles would use basically the hallways for the restrooms. Obviously the fountains don't all work at the same time. And probably more importantly, it totally bankrupts the French people. And so at the end of the rule of Louis XIV, France is in some serious economic problems that his son Louis XV is going to have to take care of. And that's going to be one of the major causes of the French Revolution. Okay. Also, while we're building that huge, we're building this huge palace, France is going to go to war with the rest of Europe. France has a much larger European population than the rest of Europe. So, like they have 4 times as many people as the British. They have 10 times as many people as the Dutch and the Netherlands. And so Louis tries to expand his territory. The Dutch are kind of young and upstart, and so why not try to fight them? And then to counteract the powers of the French at this time, the European nations are going to unite against Louis, and they're going to fight. And so there's this constant fighting between the French and the British, and the French and the Dutch, and the French and the Spanish, that's going to drain the treasury of France. It's also going to coincide with a series of poor harvests in France. It's going to reduce the amount of grain storage, and so you're going to see lots of problems there. One of the examples basically is when the Habsburg throne comes to an end with Charles II, the next person in line is actually Louis XIV's grandson, Philip V, through marriage. His mother was a Spaniard, and so it would be problematic for one family to control all of France and Spain. And so the other European nations are very angry about that, and they go to war with France over this. And so England, the Netherlands, and Austria try to fight the French and the Spanish to ensure that the French and the Spanish aren't going to unite. And so, of course, a lot of these wars, there's not total destruction, and it's hard to completely wipe somebody out when you have to stab everybody with a bayonet. And so the French are going to secede some of their Caribbean colonies to the British, but Philip V is allowed to rule France, but France and Spain are required to, due to the peace deal, are required to remain separate nations, which doesn't necessarily. If we were in a European history class, we would spend a lot more time, I suppose, on this. But just know that there's constant warfare over all kinds of different issues. The French try to expand territories. The French try to expand power through ruling multiple countries. We'll just end here. The French are a major military power, by the end of Louis XIV. However, they struggle with having money to support their undertakings. They have huge cultural growth during this time frame. We build the Palace of Versailles with the gardens and the artwork and all of that. At the same time, we're bankrupting the French treasury, and we're not really improving the lives of the French people. The French people are facing a huge tax burden to pay for the lifestyles of the nobles, right? And Louis XIV is really going to, while he's loved by his people because he's so charismatic, his excesses are really going to start to drain. Well, they're going to drain the French treasury, and they're going to drain the French people's belief in their monarchy, and that's what's going to set the stage for the French Revolution. All right, so we're going to stop there. I'll do a separate video on the Habsburgs, and then a separate video on the English, and I hope we can kind of split this up and you guys enjoy it. Have a great day, and we will see you next time.